Hi there, I'm Jim.
And I'm Claire.
Let's talk teaching. Welcome to Let's Talk Teaching, a podcast from the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology here at Illinois State University. I'm Jim G. Joining me again today, Dr. Claire LaMonica, our director. Hey, Claire.
Hi.
We took a trip this weekend.
We did. We had a road trip. We took our podcast on the road.
Yes, although we didn't actually record anything, which was a plan.
But we played. We didn't record anything. So we went to a conference in Montreal, Canada. It's the Professional Organizational Developers Conference, and educational developers are the bulk of that conference. People who do what we do. And we did a session on how to create a podcast for your teaching center, and it was well attended, and people really got into it. We had about 10 or 11 groups, pairs, and triads recording little demo podcasts, and they had a great time, and we had a great time. Really
good questions too, and as with any teaching or professional development. No, seriously.
Yeah.
You learn things by the act of facilitating something like that, or by the act of leading a class. And so on the flight back, I was thinking I got work to do. When we come back.
There we go. I'm glad that job security for you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, but thank you to everyone who participated in that. And maybe we got a few new subscribers out of it too.
Some of you, if you're listening to this because you were at our session, thanks for coming.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So, but that's not the gist of our or the central thesis of today's episode. We wanted to kind of put a period on this semester's teaching experience for you, because you went back into the classroom and taught LinC, which is Learning in Communities.
Learning in Communities. Mm-hmm.
And it was an 8-week course, so it's been a few weeks since it's wrapped up.
Been over for a while.
But you still had some, because of the nature of the course, I think, because you only had half a semester to deliver it, and it's a project-oriented course towards the end, you were still playing cleanup a little bit.
I had only half a semester to do all the things that you do in a semester.
Right.
So we had a final project, we had, it was intense for me and for them, but I'm almost finished with my grading. I didn't actually get the first student email, wondering about course grades until the beginning of this week.
Well, that's good.
And I wrote back and said, man, I've been, I finished teaching the course and I went to the West Coast, and then I came back and I went to a conference here, and then I came back, and then I went to Montreal, which is east, and I came back. And so it's been a little hairy, but I am almost finished with the grading, and they'll all be glad, I think.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. So that leads to what we wanted to talk about today was, like I said, kind of put the final punctuation on it for this semester. But let me start by looking ahead. Do you want to teach it again? And
absolutely.
And do you think you'll get the chance to?
Well, that's not my decision. But I did have lunch with Pam Ambrose, and she and I shared with each other that we always end the semester wishing that we could start the semester over, and that teaching the course again is a great chance to do that. I said that I thought I would be able to do it better next time. I learned some important lessons about the course this time, so I sort of made my case, and I'm hoping she's going to take me up on it and invite me back.
And it runs only in the fall, though.
Only in the fall.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, stay tuned.
Yeah,
find out.
Tuned. Yeah.
Stay tuned and find out.
Yeah,
we'll
let you know.
You're teaching. So you got back into the classroom, and we talked a little bit. We did an episode recently about around midterm for you, which was about quarter term for the rest of us who are teaching a 16-week course. And you talked a little bit about what you had expected going into the course and what you actually encountered when you got in front of the students and started working with them. You had some good days, but we were also talking before we started that you had a bad day.
I had a bad day, and it's only an 8-week course, so I'm sure I could have had more bad days if it had been a little longer course. But I did have I had a bad day. I came back truly distressed because I had initiated a student conversation, a discussion, a class discussion that really went off into the weeds and took off at the very end of class, right? When it was too late for me to pull everybody back into the corral or anything like that, where we sort of were getting what I considered dangerously close to blaming the victim,
right?
Things like that.
So tell us what happened, because I think it's important. And one of the things that when we consult with faculty members about having difficult conversations, and we've done a couple episodes of this podcast about that too.
I should listen to them.
No, but it's so important.
I should have listened to them before.
Well, I think what you just said was one of the things that we often say is that we have to regain control of those situations, and unfortunately, you were also playing beat the clock, and you weren't able to do that. So if you can give us some specifics, and then tell us how you ended up resolving it.
Well, so one of the things that the students in LinC do is participate in a activity called the Human Library, which is this great activity where students get a chance to meet with people who have overcome some difficult circumstance in their life or gained some important lessons somehow, and they give the and these are books. These are people who are books, and the students get to choose which books they're going to engage with, and they go and they listen to the book tells its story, and then the students can ask questions and have a little conversation. Well, in preparation for that, I had the students listen to a short podcast by a gentleman who is now a teacher and an author, but who was at one point in his life, in his early 20s, homeless. And I had them write, before they listened, I had them write a little bit about, what do you think of when you think of homelessness? I told them they didn't have to share. It was just for their own purposes. What do you think of when you think of homeless people? So on and so forth. And then they listened to the podcast, and then I asked them to write again about, whether their perceptions had been altered or challenged or confirmed by the podcast. And then we had a class discussion, sort of reflecting on their reflections. And the discussion was going, I thought, pretty well, actually, until 2 minutes before the class was going to be over. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, sometimes those people are just scamming you, and they have a Lincoln parked down the street, with a Coach handbag inside. And I was like, oh, wow. and literally, before I could hardly open my mouth, everybody was packing up their bags and leaving. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah, right.
Wait, come back. We need to talk. So I got back here. I was pretty, I was bothered.
Yes.
And disturbed.
And I was up, as I sometimes am lurking in the lobby up front. I think I was here when you came back, and just like I said, after your first day of teaching, you floated in.
Yeah.
You weren't floating.
No, I kind of crawled.
Yeah, it was kind of tough.
That was a bad day. And I think the importance of telling that story is not to say, hey, anybody can have a bad day, but to say that I had to do what we all have to do when we have a bad day. And that is, I had to figure out what I was going to do the next day.
Right.
And I think the process that I used for figuring that out, which involved some reflection on my own, but also involved consulting colleagues. So I had a great conversation with Dana Carricker, who's a coordinator here, who I think did the podcast on to having difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And so I went and talked to her about what might be appropriate. And, we came up with some ideas for activities we came up with several ideas. And then when I went back to the class, actually it was very interesting. When I went back to the class, it was almost as if some of them had been bothered as well, because as soon as I sort of broached the topic, they started jumping in and saying, well, we kind of ended up,
Oh, so they felt it too.
Yeah, I think they felt it too.
Well, that's great. Yeah.
It was great. That was like a gift from heaven, but so that was good.
And I think the lesson there is that it is very easy for us as teachers to tell ourselves when it does happen and a conversation goes off track and you're not able to bring it back, that the old cliche, time heals all wounds. Now, let's just not deal with it.
Yeah.
Let's just let it lie and move on. Students are affected by these things, even if you don't pick it up in the moment.
Yeah.
And even if it is not, this particular example you have is something that is socially uncomfortable, borderline, possibly socially offensive.
Mm-hmm.
It may not cut as deep as a racial slur or some sort of uncivil speech in a class where, as a teacher, you have to say, you have to address it immediately.
Where you have to draw the line and say, that kind of talk is just unacceptable in this space.
We can't do that in this space. Yeah, so it kind of skirted the edge of that, but it was still enough. So I think it's great that you were able to pick up on that, and you were able to have them help you with that follow-up conversation.
Well, and I think it was great that they had picked up on it. Yeah. I don't think I was the only person that went home and reflected on that conversation afterwards. And that really, that sort of reaffirmed my faith in the class.
Sure.
So that was good.
So what was the kind of the final resolution of that conversation? What was the consensus, or was there none? Or
we actually ended up working. I had them work in small groups to talk about perspectives on issues and where different perspectives come from, and how there's not, issues aren't generally black or white. There's not usually just two perspectives on any issue. So I actually had them identifying a variety of perspectives on a variety of issues and where those perspectives might come from. And so they sort of came around to, a given person can develop a perspective based on a single incident or experience, and that's not the whole perspective, and it may not even be the most informed perspective because the experience may not have given them the whole picture, or they might have even misunderstood the experience. So anyway, they came up. They were great.
Yeah.
And they went into the human library, had great reflections on the books that they had heard. So it was, so in the end, it all worked out.
Yeah. Well, so much of teaching is, isn't it? Sometimes. So a couple of final questions to wrap up here. What would you, if you do get the chance to teach this again, what would you change either, or, I mean, I'm sure you have a list. We always have a list, but what would you change from a you standpoint, from a procedural standpoint, or from a content standpoint, anything like that?
Yeah. Well, so it seems to me that when we first talked about the fact that I was going back into the classroom, I said that I was running into the problem that I think a lot of us run into, which was I had too much content and too little time. And so I was, at that point in the semester, I was madly tossing things, I was scrapping things. Okay, I'm not going to be able to do this. I didn't do enough of that.
Okay.
So I still left, too much stuff in.
Okay.
So I fell into the trap of, trying to do more things, sort of an inch deep instead of a fewer things, a yard deep.
Right.
And I think this is a class that might benefit from a fewer things a yard deep. And so that's one thing that I'll do next time is I'll focus a little more spend more time on some of the major components of the class and sort of toss some things that I was bringing to the class that I thought might be helpful,
right?
But were probably just distractions. So that's probably the thing I'll do differently.
Fair enough.
That plus next time I'll know ReggieNet better. So.
Well, that's true too. I mean, there is the practical learning curve that you have to go through whenever you're doing a new course prep because you're doing something differently. So, what was your favorite moment of your truncated semester?
Oh, wow. I think, so this is just pure, hubris or something. But
Right.
my favorite moment was the last day of class when one of my students asked me what other classes I taught. So he could sign up for something else I was teaching. That was really, that was just sweet. And I mean, it wasn't, there was no point in just, he wasn't trying to suck up or anything,
right.
because, the work was done. They had spent the class period sort of sharing their final projects with each other. And we'd had, and the other thing was, so the final class, they all brought drafts of their final projects to share with each other. They had a few more days to work on them, but I had them bring them so they could give each other ideas. And then I thought, well, that's not going to take the whole class. I wonder what we should do. And so I thought, I'll bring treats. I took muffins because it was like an 11 o'clock class, and we'll play a game. And so I made this bingo game. I went online and found a bingo card generator, and we made this bingo game with terms from the class. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I don't know how they're going to respond to this. And they were so excited to play bingo. I was like, whoa, score.
There you go.
That just really surprised me. But it was a delightful last class. And it was not just because the semester was over for us.
Right, right.
So that was a favorite.
Great. Well, Claire, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
And that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Let's Talk Teaching. Find out more about our podcast. Go to ctlt.illinoisstate.edu. Click on the podcast link in the upper right of the page. You can find more information about this episode and the LinC program through University College here at Illinois State. And you can also find some past episodes. For Dr. Claire LaMonica and all my colleagues here at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, until we talk again, happy teaching.